Etzel, you have been a leading researcher on altered states of consciousness, looking at parapsychology. From your whole perspective of looking at consciousness from all these different aspects, what are you willing to say about the potential of life after death, which of course any materialist, scientist, or philosopher would completely deny?
I will tell you what I used to think before I started becoming more familiar with the literature. And that was, well, we die, that's it. It was wonderful to be alive. If you were lucky enough not to be in the midst of a war and being bombarded. So it's wonderful. And then I started reading more about serious research. And I mean serious of people who entertain different hypotheses, different explanations, and looking at the direct quotations, transcripts of some of the sessions with some of the great mediums in history. And then what I would say is that my initial closed door, when I thought, of course, we die, that's it. We just become humans. We are gone. I would say now it's somewhat open. Does not mean that I am convinced, because for me, what is really difficult is to try to get a sense of, well, let's assume that consciousness can continue to exist without a body, without a nervous system. I think that's possible, because consciousness in parapsychology seems to be able to do things that do not seem to be based on the senses or in ordinary, let's say, neural functioning. But then how do we experience things without having eyes, without having ears, without having a body? How do we place ourselves? Not saying it is impossible to find a perspective, but it's not an easy one. Certainly I am not for, there are some people who explain it basically saying, oh, well, we just continue. There was one book I reviewed critically of a Brazilian medium, and he was saying, well, we die, and then there is also cinemas in the afterlife, and there are restaurants. And I'm thinking, what do you mean restaurants? You no longer have a body. So, and what are you doing your dishes with? You know, this seems to be sort of a perversion of materialism and spiritualism and so on to make something that makes no sense to me. Having said that, I have heard about sessions of Mrs. Leonard, Mrs. Piper, some of the mediums that were really very well controlled earlier on, and there are some mediums to our days that continue to have to come up with evidential information, that come up with very accurate information about somebody who died. Not generalities, not things that one could say, well, you have a scar on your left knee. Well, maybe you do, but we children ended up falling a lot. So that might be a good guess, nothing more than that. But they come with something more specific to say, you had a pet doll and her name was Susie, and Susie was chewed by your dog, whose name was Blackie, whom your sister loved to embrace. You know, coming up with super precise information, while at the same time there are researchers who are writing everything that is going on to make sure that the people who are being read to are not providing information. They are making sure that the medium has not done anything cloudy, dizzy, dishonest. And so they come up with that information.
Right. So one of the arguments against that, in that data being supportive of life after death, ironically comes from parapsychologists who say this could be evidence of what they may say is super psi. In other words, they're not communicating with the dead. What they're doing is they're having some precognition or some sort of telepathic relationship with the living that enables them to get information that is non-sensory. And so it does not prove life after death, but rather prove some aspect of super psi.
And I think that is a hypothesis that must be entertained. Will we be able to have some kind of research that can disentangle between both of them? At least at this point, I don't think so. Maybe at some other point it will. I'm reading right now, or I finished reading a very good novel, Booker Prize finalist by Anne Michaels, Health, and she gets the notion that survival is demonstrated by events, everyday events where somebody's trying to contact us. I respect the depth of feeling, the clarity in her thought of how she is showing that. Am I fully persuaded? No. At the same time that I have at times felt that some of my dear departed felt close. Is that just something I made up? The issue then becomes that I made up, and that takes us back to our ordinary sense of self where we are separate. When we take the notion of we may be interconnected and there is no time and space, then all the bets are off.